Hey everyone! Today on the plastic canvas we're painting the stormtroopers from Star Wars Imperial Assault by Fantasy Flight Games. Hey everyone, Matty from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to the 4th episode in this Star Wars Imperial Assault series, and today we're painting the Stormtroopers. These guys need no introduction as they're the main unit available to the player on the Imperial side. Now just a quick note before I start talking about how I'm actually painting them is that in the game there are 9 Stormtroopers and all of them are exactly the same, which means I paint them all in the exact same way. So just in the interest of time and your own engagement and sanity, I'm only going to show you how I paint one of them. But every step that you see me do to the one in the video is done to the other 8 alongside. What I am going to do though, as much as possible, is put up a photo at the end of each step to show you how all of them are progressing alongside each other. So as a starting point, I laid down a grey prime. Now you may think that because the Stormtroopers are white, it would make more sense to prime in white. Now you absolutely could do that. But the reason that I primed in grey as opposed to white is because the initial base coat that I lay down is not actually white. I lay down a light grey as a starting point. The reason for that is because when highlighting, if you base coat with white, then you've only got white to highlight with, and sure, there are different shades of white, but you're only going to get very, very minimal contrast. But by base coating with the light grey instead of the white, I'll be able to get some contrast when highlighting, because there is more of a difference between the light grey and the white. The other reason why I'm base coating with a light grey instead of white is because I find light grey a much easier colour to shade or do the shadows with than what white is, because the light grey is a darker colour than the white. It has more depth to it, it's a deeper colour, so it's easier to do the shadows with. Now I still could have laid down a white prime for the light grey base coat to go over, but when you lay a colour down, it gets affected by the colour that's already there underneath it. And if I had the white prime down, the light grey base coat would appear brighter than what it would is if it went over the grey prime that you can still see sitting there. And because I wanted the grey base coat that I put down to have as much depth to it as possible, so that it gives me maximum room to go up with the highlighting, but then also makes it easier to start to shade or do the shadows with, the grey just made more sense to me to prime with as opposed to white. So even though you will see other people priming in white with the Stormtroopers, and you absolutely can, those were the reasons for me. So because I knew that I was going to be base coating with light grey, I wanted to have as much depth to that base coat colour as possible so that it was easier to highlight with the white, but then also easier to shade as well. And so just for the way that I was going to be painting, a grey prime just was going to be working better than a white prime. So now that I've finished waffling on about all of that, you can see I'm now using the light grey to base coat all of the different armor panels. But before doing this, I filled in all of those sections in between each of the armor panels, which I figure is some sort of black bodysuit sort of thing that they wear underneath. Now, even though these sections are supposed to end up being completely black, I base coated it with a dark grey mixed with a little bit of black, because when I finish painting each of these different armor panels, I then do a black wash that goes over the whole mini, and some of that wash will flow into each of these little sections and further darken it. But also, some of these little sections have some slight ridges to them. There is some texture to them, I guess. And so the wash will flow into the deepest parts of them and will darken them further than the tops of the ridges. So there will be some very minimal highlighting, but it'll save me from having to go in there and pick at some of those little ridges. So I've started them lighter than what I want them to end up finishing as, but because the wash will go over the top, it'll darken them down to what they should end up as, which is pretty much black, and will give it some very slight, but at least some highlighting and shading to those little ridges there. Now, there isn't too much to note here about base coating these armor panels, only to say, though, that I am painting this with unthinned Misty Grey, and if you painted with Reaper paints, you know that they are pretty thin out of the bottle anyway. The reason for that is because I'm doing this in just one single coat, and the reason I'm going for just one single coat is because I knew that by the time the black wash goes over the top, and then I do the highlighting and shading, it's not going to matter whether there's full opacity or not in this coat. So just one coat over the top, just carefully, meeting the edges where it gets to the black, just to keep that nice and neat. But I do just come back here and do some little touch-ups just to make sure there are clean lines. Alright, so here I'm going to start to use the black wash over the whole mini to give the effect of shading and just to give a little bit more definition to some of the smaller details. Now you can see that I mixed in some Lamium medium. I'm not sure of the exact ratio that I mixed up, I just played with it a bit, but I did want it to be, as you can see, quite thin because I didn't want the black wash to be too overpowering or to, really darken it too much. I only wanted it to be quite subtle. Because the armor plating is such a light color, the shadows aren't going to be super dark. So I only wanted it to just have enough of an effect so that there is some contrast between where the shadows will be and where the highlighting will be. And now I'm getting into doing my initial stage of highlighting. So here, I'm just going back to the Misty Grey, which is what I base coated the armor panels with. And I'm just laying this down in the spots where I think the light would be hitting each armor panel. And then I'm feathering out the edges towards the direction of where the shadows would be. And this is just going to start to give a blend from the highlight through to the shadow. And this is another reason why I mixed in quite a bit of Lamium medium with the black wash and kept the shading quite subtle, because it makes it easier to get the blend from the highlight through to the shadow if there isn't too much of a contrast. So with the Misty Grey, I'm just working around and just individually highlighting each armor panel, just the sections of each panel where I think it would be getting light. That's where I lay the paint down, and then I clean off the bristles. I'm a brush licker, so I just do that with my mouth, but you can do it with your water. Clean the paint out of the bristles and have them slightly damp, and then just feather the edge of the paint out towards where the shadow would be, so that it gradually becomes thinner and thinner and thinner as it gets away from where the light is its most concentrated, and then it just starts to give that nice transition from the highlight through to the shadow. After I do this stage of the highlighting, then to just boost the contrast just that final bit, I then do another layer of highlighting with white. And for that, I just lay it down where the light is going to be its absolute most concentrated, and then I just don't feather it out quite as far as what I do with this stage here. So then it gives a transition from the white through to the grey, then through to the shadow colour which has been left by the black wash. Now, if there was only one Stormtrooper in this game, I would have spent more time working on the blends and building these highlights and shadows up over quite a few more layers, so that I would have been able to go deeper with the shadows to get more contrast. But because there are 9 Stormtroopers in this game, any extra things that you do, any extra time, is going to just really increase the time that it takes to paint all of them. And so what I've done here is just painted these so that when they're in the middle of the table, they look good there as opposed to just holding them just a couple of inches in front of your face. And I found this process of just doing the wash and then these 2 layers of highlighting to be a really effective method for getting a good bit of contrast when they're in the middle of the table, but it hasn't taken too long. And so, yeah, the techniques that I'm using for painting these is purely so that they look good in the middle of the table, and I'm really happy with how this ended up working. Alright, so here I'm getting into doing the final stage of the highlighting, and this is using pure white. So for this stage, all I do is just lay the paint down on each armor panel where I think it would be getting the most concentrated amount of light, and then cleaning the bristles off, and then with them slightly damp, just feathering it out towards the direction of the shadows in the exact same way that I did with the light grey, but just not feathering it quite as far, so that some of the light grey from the previous stage of the highlighting is still shown. And by feathering the edge out, it becomes thinner and thinner and thinner, and as it gets thinner, it allows more of the colour that's underneath to show through. And so it's a really, really good way of getting a nice subtle blend from your current highlight through to the previous one. And so I'm just aiming here for a smooth blend from the brightest white highlight through to the light grey of the previous highlight, through to then the shaded light grey that was the initial base coat that then had the wash go over the top of it. And so like I was saying just before, this is just a super, super simple way of just quickly highlighting these guys without spending too much time. But I think this final stage of using the white is a really, really important stage, because this helps to boost that contrast even more. It gives the impression that the armor panels are white, but without painting them all white and then losing all of your contrast. Also, when these guys are, out in battle and all that sort of stuff, sure, their armor panels might start white, but they're going to get a little bit dirty here and there and that sort of stuff. And so I didn't actually want to completely paint these guys white. I wanted most of it just to be that grey with a little bit of depth to it, so that they don't look too pristine and that they look like they have been through some battles and dirtied up just that little bit. But finishing off with the white does give that contrast, which is really important when these guys are in the middle of the table being seen from the distance of everyone sitting around the edge. Now, just as a finishing touch, I'm starting to add some battle damage to the stormtroopers just to make it look as though they've copped some blaster fire. Now, just to make sure that I had this looking correct, this is the image that I worked off just to make sure that I did have the blaster look correct. Now, the main thing that I noticed from this image is that each blaster shot is more black in the middle, and then in an uneven pattern, it then feathers out back to the armor panel. And also, only some of the blaster shots look fresh and to have that sort of glowing look to them, and so I tried to recreate that here as well. So you can see I've just put down a little black blob, and then just by cleaning off the bristles, getting them a bit wet, just then smudging, I suppose for lack of a better word, the edge so that it blends back out to the armor panel, and then I come back with a second blob of black, put it in the middle, smudge the edges again in an uneven way, but just not quite as far, so that it leaves that more concentrated black dot in the middle, but then it fades back out. And for each of them, I just tried to do them in different sorts of patterns. So some of them have a spot on the top of their head, some of them, as you can see, this guy here has one on his shoulder. They're all in different spots, just to make it look as though each of them have cop shots from different directions, and that they're not just direct clones of each other. Now, just for this sort of glowing look for some of them, just to make it look like they've really only just copped this shot, I put down a little blob of red first, and then just right in the very, very middle, a little dot of yellow. So the yellow doesn't cover up all of the red, just so that it looks as though it's hotter in the middle than what it does on the outside. But I only did that for a couple, and anywhere on each one that I did that, I made sure they were close to each other and on the same side of the stormtrooper, so it looked like they'd kind of been shot a couple of times from the same direction, as opposed to copping fire from 360 degrees. And now we're just finishing it off with a super simple base. You can see I'm using gap filler here just to build up some landmass. I've done, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos now, and I've done a specified video on it. I use gap filler now instead of something like Sterling Mud. This stuff is super cheap. You get heaps more of it in these big tubes that it comes in, and it works really well. So you just smush it around, build up the space where you want it to. As you can see from the photo there, I arranged it in a different way for each one. Then we just paint it brown wash over the top, and then I just stick down some different types of grass and tufts and things like that. Alright, so now that the actual basing is done, it's now just a couple of different coloured rings just to represent the different units. So there's 3 that get the black ring, 3 get the grey, and 3 get the red. And a gloss varnish after these are done just to make the armour look reflective. Our stormtroopers are finished. So thank you very much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it and that you found something useful that you can take away to use in your own painting. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and hit the subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with future videos as they keep coming out. And please do stop by the Twitter and Instagram account for this channel to see what I'm painting at the moment and what's going to be coming out soon. And also, I would love it if you take anything away from my videos and use them in your own painting, whether it's a technique or a color scheme, whatever. Post it on Twitter or Instagram and tag me in it so that I can see it. Some of you have been doing it and I love seeing that. So until next time, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.